Thank you for attending and taking the time to attend our webinar on how we can do secure and compliant mobile banking. With me today, I have Pat Shui. Pat, why don't you go ahead and introduce yourself a little bit?
Hey, good morning, everyone. So my name is Pat. I'm dialing in from Singapore this morning. Hey, Krishna, good to have you on the webinar with me. I look after technical solutioning for many of the customers in the region, focus around application security, about mobile device security, and glad to be part of the session today.
Thanks, Pat. Looking forward to the conversation. Folks, my name is Krishna Vishnuvatna. I'm head of product strategy at Zimperium for application security. So really my role at Zimperium is to help to understand what our customers are doing with mobile applications and to make sure our security solutions fit their needs. I'm very glad to have Pat to kind of talk about banking, where banking's headed, and how are we looking to support the innovation in banking. Let's get started. Quick housekeeping before I dive into the agenda. Folks, this is about 30 minutes. As we cover a various set of topics, if you have any questions, please put it in the Q&A section of Zoom. We will try to get to as many questions as possible. And if we cannot, we promise after the webinar, we will reach back out to you to either answer your question or to have a conversation. Right? Just agenda for this morning. A little quick intro about where banking's headed, some trends that we are seeing with banking and just security for banking. There are obviously some factors that stand out to us about what is really impacting the need and the importance for security when you think of, financial services, and whether it's fintech, payments, or traditional banking. There are some new attack techniques emerging that Pat will talk about that are changing how companies are thinking about security and how we're helping in that space. Regulation is a big conversation in financial services. We'll take two examples of regulation and how they're trying to keep up and what they're trying to do to keep citizens safe. And then we'll end it with some best practices that we have learned working with customers on security. What has worked for them and what would potentially work for you. So let's dive into this. One, just a little bit for those of you who don't know Zimperium, we've actually been in the mobile security business since 2009. We have close to 1,000 customers. A lot of them are enterprise Fortune customers, and we do a lot of consulting and solutioning in the financial service space. So a lot of customers who buy our stuff are traditional banking companies, fintech and payments. So we're quite familiar. We have some large partnerships with Google and Samsung because we also have a device security business. So we see a lot of information around apps that get submitted to Google and different things device manufacturers like Samsung are doing. So we collaborate with all of them to secure the mobile ecosystem. Key trends. Now, obviously you folks see this. We see this globally, is the move from banking at a branch versus banking on some form of a digital channel. As you can see some of these stats, most of us today want to bank from everywhere, but not from a branch, right? I think the branch is an important part of the strategy, but a lot of transactions are coming through digital channels. And more of them are coming through the mobile digital channel, right? As it's just convenient for consumers. We also see other things between the shift to branchless banking. Even within Asia, there are different trends that we're spotting. I was saying emerging Asia, you can see, is way ahead in adopting digital channels than other parts of Asia. But all in all, we see that consumers find it very convenient to adopt mobile as a way of banking. But the problem, what we see is as banks and fintech companies and payment companies adopt mobile, whether it's mobile apps, and they let you do more in the mobile app, we're also seeing a lot of security breaches arise, right? Whether it's scams through malware or scams through phishing, we're seeing some real attacks play out in the region. Pat, you're obviously in the region. You hear a lot of these concerns. What are you hearing from customers and prospects that are looking to secure their mobile banking applications?
Yeah. So thanks, Krishna. So I think there's not new, right? There's a lot of these news. I think people living in the region, hopefully, do not have, don't know anyone who's being affected, right? But this is being really taking, place across the geography here, predominantly because we have a much bigger, I think, Android market here in Asia. At the same time, the type of malware are getting so sophisticated, right? As a technique, right? Obviously,
Yeah.
the attacker or the bad guy never just uses one way to get in, right? Because it takes a lot of planning. But we just see a massive increase, right? People, social engineering, changing people's behavior, and sometimes, when we look at some of these malware, Krishna, they are advanced to a point when user grant a little small permission, the malware takes care of everything. It will accept prompts and read messages, approve transactions, delete things, right? And I think ultimately the user are getting impacted. Governments are scratching their head. They're communicating with there's always a communication to the users, because all the people losing money are the ones that probably less technical savvy, right? But we have seen cases even in the banking scenario, Krishna, there are very knowledgeable technology kind of personnel still got scammed, right? So
Yeah.
it's a big problem that really affecting all sorts of users in the region.
So, Pat, I mean, you bring up a great point, right? I mean, we have a combination of where banks, fintech companies, and payment companies are innovating, which is the right thing to do, right?
Yeah.
To deliver frictionless banking, right? Which is why we love our mobile apps and phones and real-time banking to consumers. But at the same times, right, the bad guys are also adopting new techniques that work well with the way we are developing mobile banking applications. I mean, you touched on this. Why don't you spend a few minutes and tell us how are the attackers also innovating, right? What are they doing differently to really steal people's information and commit fraud?
Yeah, sure. So I think this concept, because being working with many customers in the region, right? We all know our application or banks, they have some forms of security building, right, in their application, in their system today, right? But I think one thing that has definitely shifted in the last couple of years is this notion of outside-in attack. So I'm just gonna go through your slides, Krishna, backwards. Yeah, it's kind of like, so outside-in attack simply means, right, you build your application, maybe you secure you do everything you can, but the issue is that this app that you have built ended up installed or running on a user's device that you have no control of, right? Running outdated version of a software, maybe maybe already jailbroken and rooted because the user like to play with some restrictions. Maybe they are outdated or doesn't have a pin code. So there's all these environmental issue that you have no control of, right? And this is where the attackers are taking advantage, Krishna. So looking at I mentioned about social engineering. There are more attack. Even Singapore Monetary Authority have shared, right? Starting from malware, people calling you from scam. Now you have application on your phone making fake or virtual phone call to impersonate as an organization, a bank, right? So there's all sorts of weaknesses they're exploiting. They're calling people and say, hey, I'm from bank so and so. We notice that you have a suspicious transaction. We'd like to help you, and let's start a screen sharing session. Let me help you, right? And as soon as this kind of activity goes through, right, things gets implanted, right? We saw Trojan, we saw malware, we saw all these applications that once they get installed on the device, they can essentially take over, right? Meaning that, Krishna, you are receiving an SMS OTP, right? Now the malware reads it, the malware can even delete it, right, Krishna? And if you look at what you're typing in, logging into a transaction or a bank for certain authentication, right, username and password, the malware can take it. And once they have it, right, they then can use that to take over the account, right? So there's a lot of different sophistication. We call it, we see that as outside in, because all the technique, right, the bank have used today doesn't actually prevent and stop against these attack. And unfortunately, that's the sort of the easiest way that people are taking advantage of.
Yeah, Pat, I mean, that's a great point, right? Because we've spoken to so many financial services companies that are trying to do the right thing, right? They start with saying, we are embracing multi-factor authentication, OTP,
Yes,
and they
that's right.
believe this will prevent a lot of the credential stealing and account takeover. But what you're saying is, the malware is not only capable of capturing the username and password that you're typing in, but also kind of getting the OTP that you get from the bank.
That's
right? So the OTP only goes to a certain stage, but malware is sophisticated enough to know that, right? So you have to look beyond these mechanisms.
That's right.
So, I mean, in your mind, even in the US, right, we have a lot of banks tell us there's a lot of scams going on, right? And a big part of the scam is someone will call you and say, I am from Bank ABC. I'm trying to help you, but they will send them a URL saying, click on this URL and I can help you with your banking problem. Right? And the consumer has no way to know whether this URL is legitimate or not.
That's right.
Right?
That's right.
And that makes, I mean, they trust the caller, but they have no tool to ensure that this is not a phishing URL. And that adds to the complexity of this problem. So I agree with you, right? We need to look beyond basic security mechanisms because the attackers are also getting smarter, right? With social engineering and attacks. Now, you mentioned regulation, right? And we know there are two regulations, and we'll start with Singapore because that's what you are, and you hear a lot of this. The Monetary Authority of Singapore has called out certain areas of security, right? Specifically in their regulation, right? But why are they calling out these things and not everything else? Give us a little insight into why these are more important.
Yeah, I think this has been evolving for some time now, Krishna. If you look at this technology risk management guideline, right? This is actually published back in 2021, right? This is kind of all before the bad news have started to happen. And, as the guideline kind of dictates, right, it's recommending the financial institution to consider, right, if you're using devices to perform, activity and work-related task, right, you need to have certain level of security, right? So the left-hand side talks about, how does the financial institution protects mobile devices that's used by the employees, right? So I think the very common things we see all the time, device needs to be managed, right? Needs to have certain policies and hardening, and it needs to check for basic security postures, right? And this is where, the example you mentioned about phishing, the example we talked about how the attackers are, distributing this malware through a unofficial store, right? Because we work with Google, so we know there are apps that continues to be vetted, right? And there's a good standards of security and review. But these bad guys are using WhatsApp to deliver an APK file, for example. They are using a phishing link, right, to silo a file. Today, even the latest technique we found, right, because people starting to trust less and less about APK files and apps that you get from messages, right? So now they're delivering through a Chrome kind of browser, and it's generated from the Chrome browser, right? So a lot of people think, oh, well, that seems legit because that's related to Google, right? But in fact, those are actually still malware. They just deliver through different mechanism, right? So I think the notion of security is important, to have that hygiene, right? On the right-hand side, though,
that's a great point, Pat, right? I think I want to emphasize what you just said. Majority of enterprises and banks that we talk to believe that majority of the phishing links or malware comes through business email, they believe they're
Yeah.
covered, but what you just suggested is that that's not true, right?
Yeah.
They are getting you not via your business email, but through your WhatsApp, through the browser, through your personal channels, and less through your
Absolutely.
corporate channel because they know
Yes.
you're fully exposed. That's a great point. Keep going.
Yeah. 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 So on the right hand side, you can see these are, controls and security measures, right, for protecting the app, right? So I think none of these are new to a lot of the financial institution. And in fact, I think some of them will say, hey, I've done all these, but I'm still getting scammed, right? Like why, how is that even possible, right? And that goes back to the technique, right? Because if you stay the same, the attacker's going to find different entry point to come in, right? So I think, but it's very important to note here, right? All these obfuscation, checking the integrity of the app. The integrity is so important, Krishna, because we have seen recently, right? So Singapore government provided some security application, right? It's called Scam Shield, right? It's used
Yep.
for anyone who gets a scam phone call. The app will actually checks, right, and then prevent and block those phone calls, right? Unfortunately, that app, right, was then taken, extracted from the public store, and malware and spyware was injected into that app. So, and then redistributed to, through the channel,
Wow.
right? So when the user gets
Wow.
it, it's actually looks legit. It's a government app. Of course, the sources is a little bit suspicious, right? But the spyware was actually injected so that it allows, everything that the user is doing to be monitored by the bad guy, right? And that is then used for fraud and all the bad stuff. And the notion of injecting like malicious code into your application, Krishna, that is a big thing. That's what also being, very much exploited, right? Any bank, just imagine any application that people build can actually be tempered and changed, and it might not be yours anymore because you just don't have that ability to secure your application effectively.
Yeah. And that's a great point, Pat, because a lot of people, when we talk about reverse engineering, I
Yeah,
think what gets lost is if I can break into your app and steal all your official logos and colors, that's what
yeah,
allows me to look like a legitimate app, right?
that's right.
Even
That's
before
right.
the code, I think your logo, I can look like you. That's what makes me legit. And a
Yes,
lot of apps make it so easy to look like
correct.
them, right?
Yeah,
And then the rest just follows. So no, that's a great point. But I
yeah,
mean, Singapore is not the only one that's prescribing security, right? They're not, right? We also have
yeah,
Malaysia that's come out and said, hey, we're going to be explicitly clear on
yeah.
what we are looking for, right? I mean,
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
when you look at the Malaysian guidelines, I mean, what stands
Yes.
out to you? I mean, there's
Yeah.
some are
So
similar, but there's some things they explicitly call out. Why?
sure, sure. So I think the different sort of government tries to provide guidance, right, to the financial institution. So for Malaysia, I think what's really interesting here is the text that I have highlighted, right? So there is this notion, Krishna, we've been talking to many customers because people's understanding of a mobile phone, right? Hey, my phone is okay. It's not rooted, it's not jailbroken, right? So that's the kind of a condition or assumption they have. I have an iPhone, it's not jailbroken, so I'm good, right? Right. However, the Malaysian RMIT actually create a new state called compromise, right? Which I think I can really resonate, and I like the distinction because just because your device is not jailbroken and rooted, right, Krishna, the ones that we use every day, it doesn't mean it's not compromised, right? A network that your phone connected to can be in a compromised state that puts your device in a compromised risk, right? A malware that you have that we've been talking about this for some time that has remote control and able to basically see what you're doing, approve transaction for you, read your messages, that can also put your device into a compromised state, right? So I think I really like the fact they are, it's not very clear, right? I mean, it's my interpretation of the regulation, but if you ask someone today, is your phone rooted jailbroken, they'll tell you, yeah, no, right? 100% I'm confident. But then if you say, is your device compromised, they're not sure, right? And this is the gray area. I believe we can help a lot of the, organization to really, you know, uh, double click into that gray area and give you a little bit more indicators and information about the overall risks. Does that kind of do you see
Yeah,
that
makes sense,
in a
Pat.
similar lens? Yeah.
I do. The other area here, which I find very interesting that the government called out, is this white box, right? I
Yeah.
mean, we talk to so many financial institutions that is for some
Yes.
reason blindly trust the hardware, the secure hardware on a mobile device. They
Yeah. Yeah.
believe
Yeah.
it can never be compromised. But that's
Yeah.
not true. And for
Not
some
true.
reason, right, it's taken a while, but I'm so glad the government in their regulation called it out, saying you can't you can't assume that it can never be compromised or that you can
Yeah.
always rely on the hardware on the phone. I mean, how do you see this white box call out that they have? How do you interpret
Yeah.
this?
Yeah. So I think this relates to data at rest, right? So we spend a lot of time when we talk to developers or even pen testers, right? They are focusing a lot. Hey, I can bypass your encryption of data communication. They can do all that stuff. So a lot of the energy has been focusing on how do I ensure my communication is secure, cannot be intercepted easily, right? But what people don't realize is once your data ends up or landed on the user's device on that endpoint, if that endpoint is compromised, then the data is also at risk, right? So I think we have the classic example. Let's not talk about banks for now, right? Let's talk about something very, very personal. Krishna, we all use WhatsApp, right? Some of the messaging applications, social media application,
Yep.
the messages that get stored right on the device, right, may not be stored in a secure encrypted way, meaning that anyone who gets onto your device, compromise the device, your messages and your personal information are actually in clear text. Think about that for a second, right? So it's almost like, oh, my house is safe. I'm putting a lot of my money into this room because I know no one can get into the house, so my money is safe. It's that kind of perception. But most people knows, right? You put a safe and you put multi-layers of security to protect that, right? Into a vault.
Yeah.
Because I still worry that people can break into the house. But I do see a lot of the application developer today, even businesses when they transforming or into this digital route, right? They're focusing on things, but maybe not looking at that whole process end to end, Krishna. And I think the white box point you have is really important, right? Because we ensure or we want to let the user know that the data is really what you're trying to protect,
Yeah.
and you need to secure them.
Yeah, Pat. And right, I mean, if you look at what we talked about, right, we know mobile banking is the future, right? And the
Yes.
future of banking is frictionless and real time, right? So for security to be embraced, it has to be frictionless and real time, right? But we also know, like you said, that the attackers are also evolving. The techniques are evolving. They are
Yes.
looking at banks saying, oh, you've adopted multi-factor. I have something to beat that. You're
Yeah.
assuming the device is safe. I have something to beat that. So I think what would be best is, so what are some best practices, right? We've now consulted with over 100 banks and helped them
Mhm.
solve this mobile app security problem. I thought we'll spend a few minutes talk about what are some best practices that we've learned working with them
Yeah.
on how to solve this, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
The first thing I have is device attestation, right? And this essentially, banks have realized that they've built a mobile app, but they absolutely need to know whether the device is safe enough to let the app run or not,
Mhm.
right? Because to your point, right, it's not just about jailbroken. Is the app compromised, and what does that mean for your customer? What does that mean for your data and the access, right? Because all the apps are talking back to a banking infrastructure,
Yeah.
right? So
Yeah.
they have realized that we need to know, the app needs to be intelligent to know whether the device is safe or not. I know the second part is something you're very close with. How about you talk about, you know,
Yeah.
everybody's
Yeah.
saying, "Oh, I do something." Give us some insight.
Yeah. So I think there's many capability or like open source tools out there, right? That can help developer onboard some security during the development process, right? A lot of those free tools are kind of give you a little bit of optimization, a little bit of everything, but it's not really strong enough to withhold, the type of attacker out there, right? Krishna, one thing I always find fascinating, right, is that when we look at when our research guys are analyzing malwares, right, we see like 30,000 unique malware samples per week, right, in our latest report. Most of those malwares are actually getting obfuscated, so it's hard to understand what the malware is actually trying to do, right? But now, if you think about legitimate businesses and have informations, and they're trying to protect their business, they are not really looking at some of these capability. And the very simple thing to just sort of understand, right? Your app has all the information on how to talk to your server. Those information like URL, API keys, configuration, things that you need, right? Like key to open the backend is embedded inside your app. And if you don't obfuscate or protect that to a level, you just make the attacker's life so easy, right? They can open up the app and they can see, oh, this is your password to get in. Let me do that, right? And then I can throw the app away and I can go into your server. So I'm quite passionate about the thing around, really we need to make the protection, right, multi-layered enough to make it really hard for the attacker. Sorry, I think I went a little bit overboard, but I think that is a really good.
But it's I agree with you, Pat, right? Because I mean, so many times when we talk about this, we've heard app teams say, "Oh, I use ProGuard. Oh, I use R8." But it takes it. I mean, we always educate them, and these are, even though they sound like security, they're optimizing your code. Like renaming classes doesn't change control flow, right? So things like that. So it's a great step, but we always tell app teams, look beyond the ProGuard and R8 for true security. Secure hardware, something we touched on, right? Whether you're an iOS platform or an Android platform, right? Whatever secure enclave, whatever you want to call it, you have on your phone. Key stores, right? We are not, once the device is compromised, all bets are off, right? And if you're developing an app and you're storing key material or sensitive material in this hardware, you also have to factor that the app could be running on a device that doesn't have the necessary hardware, or whatever they have is not viable to the security you want to implement, right? So you have to consider those things, which is what we touched on. My favorite question, and I know you love this. Talk about this one. Right?
Yeah, so this is a great one. I really like the ability. So today, right? Like if you look at in general, we have many users on the call today, right? When you use an application, when the application throws you an error and says, sorry, you cannot use the app, right? Experiencing difficulty or the devices, so for whatever the reason, there's very little information that's provided to the application support, to the security team, to the engineering team, right? There's almost no visibility, right? You kind of release your app, you go to the pen test, you hope for the best, you go out and that's it, right? You may get performance data, right? How many users are buying, servers, they are transacting with you, but all this security issue out there, how many malware trying to attack your application, how many devices are running on the compromised devices, and all that information, Krishna, is just not available, right? So I think it's very important. And even today, if you look at some of the Singapore banks that have implemented some control, right? They're like, hey, I'm blocking you because you have a siloed app, and your app is maybe a little bit has certain risky permission, right? Those kind of information, if you imagine you can get all this data before you take the block action, that'll actually give you a lot more confidence, right, Krishna? It's all about data help you make decision and ultimately to improve user experience. We've seen some example, right? Banks who implemented some measure and then everybody's like crying because it's blocking legitimate application. Yeah, Krishna. So I think data gives you the ability to understand the extent of the problem, and then when you do take action, you now have evidence. I think a lot of the organizations today, they don't have that evidence to be able to say, I'm doing this because A, B, and C, right? I'm doing this because I think maybe, this app is bad. You know what I mean? So there's a
Yeah.
distinction.
Yeah, Pat. So we were at DroidCon. For those listening
Yeah.
on the call, there were about 20 companies in the room that were building mobile apps. When I
Yeah.
asked the question, are you obfuscating your code? All of them raised their hand. I said,
Oh,
how many of you get notified when somebody tampers with your app?
yeah.
Zero hands went up,
Yeah.
but they're
Yeah.
all willing to believe that their security is working, right?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
that's
Exactly.
surprising part.
Yeah.
The last
Yeah.
one, which is my favorite, is
Yeah.
most security that we see for mobile apps, as you know, is static security, meaning you every time you release your application, you have to
Yes.
reapply the security and release the app, right? Which
Yeah.
means if a new threat was discovered tomorrow morning or a new vulnerability was discovered, you have to change the protection, reapply it, and release the app again, which could take 12 to 18 months to get on all the devices. Your
Mm.
app is exposed for 12 to 18 devices, right?
Yeah.
Which never works. So
Mm-hmm.
we
Mm-hmm.
need to move from static protections is a good first step, but
Yeah.
layering that with dynamic protections, which means you can update the security of your app over the air, right? Without having to release a new app every time,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah. Yeah.
how 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 much of this conversation do you have with banks, and how do they respond to something like this?
Yeah, yeah. So Krishna, you say this is your favorite. I think that is also my favorite. But you probably say everything is my favorite here, right? But this is the conversation that I have with almost every single banks or even people who build app that concerns about security, right? There's this notion of I think you call it in your blog recently adaptive, right? I think adaptive is visionary. I think that's bring back to a little bit the reality. It's continuous, right, Krishna? Because when you a good example, right, that I can share with you is one of our customers who protected the application and sent it to pen test. It passed, right? And then before they released, right, they went make some changes and they went through the pen test verification again, and the same protection that was applied no longer passed because the new jailbreak or routing capability was released, right? So whatever they built before they even can get into production may be out of date, right? So that's
Yes.
how fast the market is moving, right? So today we have this kind of malware that does these kind of things, right? You know what? A lot of the reaction from even the regulator are saying, oh, so the apps are sideloaded, the app has overlay feature, the app have accessibility feature, so you should try to block these, right? But there's a lot of legitimate app also do that. But one thing is tomorrow there will be app that does something else, and we already saw apps with SMS sorry the apps with the VoIP, like the voice over IP calling capability. We have seen apps with other kind of feature that introducing to circumvent everything that you check, right? So when that happens, what do? Like you said precisely, you have to update your application. You need to figure out how you stop them, right? And then you release it, and that by the time you get out, it's already too late, right? Or a lot of the time. So I think this is something that we definitely as Imperium, right, we're very proud and very much focused on how do we give customer a continuous security, regardless whether they're releasing it already live, even the users running a few version behind, right, of the current version, they're still getting protected.
Yeah, no, I agree with you, Pat, right? And folks, I hope these best practices have really helped, because all of these things and what Pat's mentioning are really driving the point home that you need to build apps that can defend themselves, right? Because Pat, the point you're making is threats are evolving so
Yes.
quickly that
Yeah.
the future is not about releasing an app every week. It's about embracing security that can adapt to the threats and that you can update over the air, right? So that the
Yeah.
app is self-defending. I think that's
Yeah.
where we see the future. And a lot of our customers that talk to us are also embracing this concept,
Yeah.
because it's
Yeah.
the only
Yeah.
thing viable as we move forward.
I like Krishna, I like how you put the adapt back, and I think relate that to just us, right? Like, you know, as a human, we adapt to situations, right? And I think
Right.
your app should have the same luxury, right, to do that, because otherwise you're just behind.
Folks, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. Again, the goal of the webinar was to bring certain regulations to the surface, talk about what's evolving, and give you some actionable recommendations for you to look and think about when it comes to your mobile app. Again, if you have any questions, we're a little over time, so you can post them in Q&A or just shoot. You can find Pat and I on LinkedIn. Feel free to reach out to us, and we're happy to engage in any conversation. Pat, any final thoughts before we sign off?
No, I think thank you everyone for attending. I hope this was of interest to you. If you're building apps, you're considering, or you know people who build apps, I think the landscape has changed, right? And you really wanted to have you put the best thing forward to secure against these this type of investment that you're making, and we're here to help. Back to you, Krishna.
Thank you so much, folks. Pat, thank you for taking the time, and we hope everybody enjoyed the session. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Have a great day.
Bye.